Good morning, Mel.
Good afternoon, Ed. How's it going?
I'm doing just fine. It's looks like summer, but it's Christmas, so
Oh boy.
it's the new world order.
So you got a bit of Portland sun, rare spotting.
Yeah, at least we're not down in Santa Cruz having tornadoes.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, it's a fun new world.
There's no place like home.
Yeah, just click your ruby slippers together twice.
Mm-hmm.
Today, you wanted to talk about the vestibular system, and when you told me that, I was like, well, I'm a fan of the vestibular system. I like mine. It helps me a lot, but I like a whole podcast on that, and then I thought, so this is going to be really interesting for you to explain how this vestibular system is so sexy and electrifying that we would want to spend our podcast on it today. And
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, challenge accepted. And from my perspective, I'm looking forward to getting your perspective on it because as I've learned about it and I'm learning about it like from the perspective of neurology, I'm like, wait a minute, this is really for me like picking up resonances of things that are discussed in the Neijing, not through that lens. And I feel like there's going to be a really cool cross pollination here. So I'm looking forward to hearing
I
from
got
you.
I got you covered on the ancients and game set match. Yeah.
All right, this is cool.
Tell me how you came to this and how you got to this place where where you're entranced with this at the moment.
Yeah, it's a funny old thing, a lot of what I've learned about the nervous system has been through necessity, where I had my own health challenges, including things that would be thought of like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and exercise intolerance, and trying to figure out like, well, what do you do when exercise doesn't make you stronger, but it makes you weaker? And what do you do if you're tired, even though you're sleeping well, like that sort of thing, where you're kind of just stuck. And so I ended up learning a lot about developmental neurology. And then when I've come across the vestibular system, it's like it's sort of particularly interesting to me because it has a few, I don't know, like surprising and interesting things about it. So like one is that it's the first part of our nervous system to develop.
Oh, really?
And
I didn't know that.
mhm. Yeah. So the and I'll make sure that just to explain that your vestibular system is basically what allows you to know where you are in relation to gravity and how fast you're moving, if at all, and also where your head is in relationship to your body. So it answers those questions like which way is up and how fast am I moving? And so we have a really the cool system that allows us to do that, and it's very conserved. So as soon as animals started moving on Earth, they used the design that we have. It's just because it works so well. But the organs that allow us to do that, they end up developing to full size before we're born. So I think it's probably the only organ in our body that's true that is true of. So everything else starts off small and then gets big as we get
That
bigger.
goes to how important it is.
Yeah, and so it seemed to me that there's like a lot of overlays. One is that these structures they're embedded in bone, probably almost under our eye, really inside, and they are made of bone, and so they have this relationship to the northern direction in Neijing medicine, which is which is related to bone and also related to like seeds and germination and where we come from. And so it seems to me that our nervous system and ourselves develop around this apparatus that we start off where we're like, this is where this is where I am in relationship to gravity. I'm on planet Earth now. Uh, and then we develop around that. So that seemed like a very interesting Neijing kind of idea.
Oh, that's so interesting. And the idea when we get away from a thing-based world to coherences of breath and light, which each have their own space-time flavor and orientation. That seems so fundamental because, in a way, that's who you are too. When you define your space-time orientation, that's really who you are. And but you're interacting with all these other coherences of space-time organization. So it's like the first thing that's said. And the Neijing talks about how in the body's development, it's, it starts from the kidney root, and then the first thing is the brain forms, and it's really an expression of the essence or the marrow, and the spine is around that too. So it kind of goes to that. It's like the first planting your flag, perhaps. Would you say something?
Yeah, it's planting your flag. It's like I am here, and that needs to happen before you can enact your will on your surroundings. So the next thing that I learned, where I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, um, is people are becoming increasingly aware of this. That if you're right-handed, so if I'm going to move my right hand, so most people are right-handed. If I'm going to move my right hand, that instruction comes from the left side of the brain, okay, left side of the cortex. And what's supposed to happen ideally is that all of your dominance profile, they say your dominant arm and your dominant leg and your dominant eye and ear should all be on the same side. So for most people, it's going to be on the left side to be right-handed, and for minority people, it'll be on the right side to be left-handed, right? But our vestibular system is actually lateralized to the other side, and that happens
Whoa.
first. So what first happens is that you're like, I am here in this time and place. And for most people, for people who are right-handed, that is on this side of the brain first, and then the dominance profile actually develops in relation to that. I'm someone who has what is called mixed dominance. So I'm like I call myself now a
I'm not surprised knowing you.
yeah, and that's not too big of a shocker. A bit of strange wirings going on. Um, I now call myself a fake lefty. And when I was younger, we used to say I was ambidextrous, but I wasn't really ambidextrous. It's more like if you hand someone a new thing, a new tool, like I like just hand you this, it should be a no brainer. You should be able to just reach out and grab it with your dominant hand. There shouldn't be any hesitation. That's like you know what you're reaching it with. It's like that's the fastest one. And for me, I'm like, I don't know which one. I write with my left hand, but my right arm's stronger, and I do sports with my right hand. Except for frisbee, I do left-handed, and like my right foot's dominant, but my left ear's dominant. It's like wacky and crazy. And so when I then learned about this vestibular development, I thought, well, that's interesting. That you know perhaps the root of mixed dominance, which is becoming more and more common. I mean, there's just the stats that are interesting, but it's first that as babies are developing, gestating in utero, they don't first have that strong like, okay, this is where and when I am. This is I'm on Earth, and
They're floating.
I'm floating in fluid, but yeah.
They haven't crossed the veil, as we say, between the world of patterns, of motions to things. That happens when the crossing the veil happens when you come out first and take your first breath, and then all the circulation in your body changes, and now welcome to the world of things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And and that brings up another interesting thing related to that, which is that from the neurological perspective, the process of being born uh, is an experience that changes our mode. Like we need to know physically when we've gone from inside to outside, and so one aspect of that, not the only aspect, but one is that there's like a squeezing that happens when you go out the birth canal. So if you are born cesarean, you miss all that squeezing, right? And of course, cesareans can save lives. They are also often elective, and so it's kind of I think it's helpful for people just to be informed about potential benefits and risks. I think that there's an increasing awareness of this kind of microbiome seeding that happens. So when babies are going out the vagina, they're getting all this like vagina juice, and that's helping to seed the gut. So there's an increasing awareness of that. But the squeezing actually it releases or it signals all these what are called experience dependent genes to switch on, so that people know that they've gone people babies know that they've gone from the
Interesting.
inside to the outside. So first is like what's going on in utero. And actually here's another thing is that our vestibular system is the first neurological system really to develop in utero, and it becomes myelated first. One reason is so that the baby knows which way is down to come out. So
Ah,
if you have babies who are in the wrong position, or they're breech, or they need to be born cesarean because they're not progressing, that might be telling you that there's already a vestibular issue. They can't find the exit.
Ah, that's interesting. I never thought of the baby's role in that. I always thought of the mother's role
Yeah.
in positioning of the baby before birth. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, well, I say obviously, but of course, there's a partnership. There should be a dance,
Right.
but there is the baby's role. That if this is not working super well, then it just can't find the exit.
And there's something so important in the squeezing. I remember that's very interesting. The squeezing is a contracting, like a yin contraction, which allows then a yang expansion afterwards, kind of like the big bang of birth.
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay. For those who don't know, what is the vestibular system? What is it comprised of?
Yeah. Sure. So it's inside of our inner ears, and the way it's been taught to me is that it's these kind of five sensors,
Okay.
right? Bilateral sensors, and one way to visualize it is if you ever use like a spirit level. And when you kind of tilt it that way, the bubble comes up this way. And when you tilt it that way, the bubble comes up that way. And so you can see very physically where flat is. Okay.
Mhm.
So we've got what are called three semicircular canals because they look like semicircles. And you have like these little stones kind of moving through fluid. And as we turn one way, the stones move these hairs like you almost like you can imagine like you're looking underwater and there's like seaweed or something.
It's like the tide pool or something where the
Yeah. So let's say like the tide's moving this way underwater and the seaweed's moving that way. But now imagine that's attached to receptors. That's telling you which way the water's moving. But if it's inside a head, that's telling you that you're moving this way. And
Mhm.
it works. And then we have these what are also called otoliths, and those are telling us about whether we're moving straight forward or up and down. So like what's activated when you're on a train is horizontal, and when you're in an escalator, elevator, then that's up and down, right?
So like the XY axis
Like
and
an XY axis. And they often will use aeronautical terms, pitch, yaw, and roll. So like in terms of like, are you this way?
like
Are
your
you that way?
plane,
Yeah.
your
Are you this
fighter
way?
jet.
hmm and so the vestibular system is so it's telling us, are we up, are we moving, that sort of thing. And so it's most people would associate it with something like vertigo, where you feel like you're spinning, or you feel like you're dizzy, but it's actually intimately connected with like lots of other things. So for example, if you when you stand up, it's actually a miracle that we're able to keep the blood pressure up in our head so that we don't pass out, because that's like actually a huge physical change. And our vestibular system is partly very essentially responsible for that. So it's deeply tied to our autonomic nervous system, our cardiovascular system, our heart rate, our blood pressure. There's also vestibular projections or connections directly to our hormone system. Okay.
Oh,
There's
tell me about those. That sounds
Oh,
amazing.
yeah, it goes right to the hypothalamus. And so I think it's relating partly to kind of sleep and wake, but I think it's also
Oh,
telling us about longer cycles. There's a really strong relationship that I think is really interesting between the vestibular system and osteoporosis. So um, when astronauts go into outer space and they don't have the effect of gravity on them, they can develop osteopenia and osteoporosis, where the bones become thin because they haven't had the action of gravity to keep their bones strong. But there's, I think, not very many people are aware of this relationship between the vestibular system and bone strength if you're not an astronaut. Those who think about it will often say, well, if the bones are thinning in the skeletal system, right? And so there's bones in the ear, so maybe those are thinning too. But what research shows is actually it's the vestibular system that is signaling to the body to build bone when we are out walking or when we're
wow.
doing all these things. And so I have patients who fall into this category who they do all of the things that are right for bone health. They have clean diets and they are out exercising and making sure they have that impact, and they're doing all the things. But if you have a vestibular issue, you still end up with what I call the astronaut effect, which is that signal is not coming through, it's not your brain's not receiving the full impact of the impact, and so it doesn't know to build bone. So that's part of it as well. And there's definitely gender relationships between um, vestibular issues and that sort of thing. So it has.
What kind of issues?
I think that benign. It's called, well, it's a type of vertigo, benign paroxysmal.
Oh, right, right, right. Yeah,
Vertigo is more common in women, and
yeah.
so there seems to be like an estrogen
We
relationship. Yeah.
we've talked about this theme, about the body wanting to move in general or just to stay still. And we've talked about that before, and you've mentioned your understanding of that, that sometimes when the body and the vestibular system or the neural functioning is not happening, the body sends a message not to move. Does that tie into this too, and just the general theme of wanting to move versus wanting to stay still?
Yes. So the brain, this is from a kind of brain centric perspective, but the brain's trying to keep us safe. It wants to keep us safe, and it's in charge of movement. Both of those things. It's going to prioritize safety and survival first. So there's a really, really strong relationship between our vestibular system and our eyes. So what happens is that if we are out walking,
So-
if if there isn't this close connection where our eyes are moving opposite to our motion, then the image would just be moving all over the place, right? Everything would be shaky, everything would be blurry. And from a survival perspective, it's really important that we're still be able to see clearly when we're walking. So we have this, it's such a cool system where um, these sensors are basically attached to the eye muscles. So anytime it senses that our eyes go this way, then the eye muscles, almost like a marionette, pull it the other way so everything stays clear. Now, what happens, and I think this happens way more commonly than anyone realizes. Let's say when I'm at rest, I'm not moving, I'm still. I should be getting equal input on both sides, right? If, let's say, I turn my head to the right, then I'm increasing the input over here and decreasing it over here. That's how my brain knows that I've turned. Okay, it's called a push pull system. Very elegant. Now let's say this system isn't working. It's like not 100% calibrated well. It's not 100% working optimally. So when I'm at rest, there's maybe a little more activity over here than here, and not so much that I notice it. Even let's say it's a 10% difference, right? So I'm getting this signal that I'm turning right because this is active more than this is active. But my eyes are telling me that I'm not turning right. My eyes are telling me no, I'm still, the image is still, this is wrong. Our vestibular system is also reflexively intimately connected with our every muscle in our body. So when my head moves or I'm moving, then automatically like muscles over here tighten and over here relax so that I don't fall down. It's a reflexive system. So if my vestibular system is a little bit uncalibrated, I'm getting the signal that I'm turning right, and that's making my postural muscles go tight on one side. But my eyes are saying something else. So what happens is the brain is like, I'm not liking this at all. I'm getting conflicting information about my environment, which means that you're increased risk of falling, and your environment is less predictable because there's a mismatch here. If I think that you're at increased risk of falling, which means that this might hit that, but I really don't want, this is not good. So I think I'm going to give you fatigue or stiffness or pain to change your behavior so that you lie down because that would be safer.
Wow. This is sending, I'm getting excited about this for several reasons, but one is because they wrote about this so clearly 2,000 years ago, almost exactly what you're saying. Yeah. The other thing I'm thinking about is like when I go to the park and walk and I see dogs running and the joy that animals have in movement. And I don't see that in people, you know? Like when you look at a dog catch a frisbee, it's just, there's so much joy in just the movement. And, people now, especially we've talked about the issues of screens and how we get in fixed positions and stay there all day. And sometimes and when we move often, it's because we have to go to the gym and then we do this kind of repetitive thing on the Stairmaster or whatever. And it doesn't look really joyful like that. So there seems like there's been this kind of loss of joy in movement.
Well, absolutely, and I don't think this was exactly the point that you were going to make, but I will say something like the stairmaster or a stationary bike or especially a treadmill. there's a problem there, which is that when I'm walking, I my brain is expecting the image to be moving past me.
Right.
But if I'm on a treadmill, that's also it's like, my feet are moving, but the image isn't moving. So that it doesn't like that either. So I know that's a little, like, kind of a little bit
No, no,
tangential,
no,
but also that wouldn't be joyful. Like,
yeah, I know when I came out to visit you and you were talking about how you got together with your friends and would move like children. Yeah, and that sounded like so much fun, but that actually seems to be an epidemic problem we have right now. Even the treadmill, like the metaphor of the treadmill is bad, like because that's like you're on the treadmill of life and then you have your heart attack,
right.
and die. And so the whole thing is kind of messed up. And that joy that children also have that, like when you start playing music and the kids start bouncing up and down and want to dance all the time, and we lose that. That's a very serious problem, isn't it, in terms of how we move through the world and how we experience the joy of life?
Absolutely. And just to point out, because I don't think I really did, that the vestibular system it's in the inner ear, and it actually shares a nerve pathway with sound. So there is a strong relationship there.
Oh, between like sound and music and dancing.
Yeah, so it's also interesting, that music, like if we hear music, that our body wants to move,
Wants to move,
you
yeah.
know, that there is a kind of systemic relationship there as well.
And so we have this vestibular system in the brain, and it has some interactions to our hormone system, and it also goes to the back of the brain, right?
Yes, it goes to the back of the brain. So it
Can,
goes,
can you tell us about that?
yeah, sure. So it goes to the cerebellum, which is back here. It's often left out of the discussion because everyone thinks the frontal lobe's so sexy, because that's where
I'm all about the back of the brain for the
if you don't have a back of the brain, the front ain't going to work too well. So we got to go back to the boring stuff, the roots, right? Everyone's interested in the fruit and
and
the
also and that's where we treat vertigo in the back.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So that makes sense. So it connects into the back of the brain, and then the cerebellum does a whole lot of stuff. So the cerebellum has these connections from the vestibular system, like where which way is up and which way are we moving, and to the eyes. So which way are those moving, right? But the cerebellum is doing a lot of other things. So it's taking all the information in from the body and it's simplifying it by a factor of 40.
So like would you say high we talk about higher and lower level of processing in the brain.
It's making it simpler. So for
It's
every
making it
40
simpler.
bits of information going in, one's coming out. So
Right.
and then it's sending that up to the brain. It's also in charge of making sure our movements are accurate. So refining. So from a neurological perspective, we'd say any unwanted movement, what we would think of as wind, perhaps in Chinese medicine, any unwanted movement is really the purview of the cerebellum.
And we see that like in the cerebellar ataxia things and like the tremors and
Yes.
movement issues that we see in the cerebellar degeneration. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, what's interesting with tremors, this is a kind of, I think it's also from an aging perspective interesting to think about. When we think about tremors, whether that's Parkinson's or something else, th- we actually all have a tremor, a physiological tremor that I think it's 14 hertz. When we're talking about tremors, what a lot of people don't realize is that actually, when we're healthy, we all have a tremor, and that's called the physiological tremor. So that's at about 14 hertz. And it's so fast that we don't see it. So when you get something like Parkinson's and you see the tremor, what happens is that the tremor is actually slowed down.
Or sometimes you see it when you get really tired or you exercise too much, and then you start to see it more. Is that correct?
That can be true too. So that's a case of the tremor that's always there, moving down. So now it's visible. So in Parkinson's, I think it's like 6 or 7 hertz, or maybe 8 hertz. So that one's always there. And then the other things about the cerebellum, so it's classically thought of as being about movement, so accuracy, balance. But again, going to that vestibular system where we're tying in our posture to our muscle tone. So whenever
Hmm.
we move, again, we don't think about this because it's so automatic that, like, if I go to reach for something, like, I don't want to fall down. So if I'm focused on what I'm reaching on, as I'm reaching, everything back here is becoming tighter, to counteract the fact that I've done that. So cerebellum's involved in that. Cerebellum's involved in balancing muscle tone between extensors and flexors, and so those are those paired muscles of going away and towards the midline, right? So they're balancing that. So even when people are getting like recurrent injuries, and we just think, oh, you're active or whatever, that may actually be a problem of the resting tone not being optimal, so that when you use it, it injures it. You get a strain or a tear or whatever it is. That can be a cerebellar issue. But
Right.
what's more recently appreciated is the cerebellum's role in all of the sexy frontal lobe stuff, the executive function, cognition, and emotional regulation.
That's funny. I think the sexy stuff's in the back. You've through our discussions, and from the aging understanding, this new idea that the cerebellum is really maybe we could almost call it the small root of the brain or something like that the kidney is the main root and then it comes up and then there's the root branch expression from the brainstem and the cerebellum, which then moves out like the branches of a tree. But it's really kind of the local brain root, it seems like. Do you agree with that language? And
Oh, 100%. Because first of all, 70 to 80% of the neurons are in the cerebellum. Like people don't realize that, right?
I didn't know that. Yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
very, very dense. And there are a lot of networks most networks really that involve the cerebellum, but when it comes to development, so you think of a tree growing, if the cerebellum's underdeveloped or underfunctioning, this bit won't grow. So there's like interesting looks at, for example, if so for most people who are right-handed, their verbal language is lateralized to the left. So in those people, language is actually lateralized to the right cerebellum. So if someone has a right cerebellar issue developmentally, they may not develop language, or they may have language issues. But interestingly, if someone who develops, let's say, normally or optimally or in a healthy way, if they damage this part of the cerebellum, they will often not lose their language. So it really is a matter of that the developmental aspect, that there's a kind of a sequence and an order that involves, that comes from here to there, but damaging something there might not necessarily equate to a loss of function up here.
And that goes to this thing about root branch treatments that we have in Chinese medicine, this concept, and how in Western thinking and modern medicine, we tend to go to the outward expressions of things, the details. But in Chinese medicine, we have this particular like of the root issues, and that if the root issues are off, the branch issues are going to always be off. But also, I'm thinking how the kidney is this thing called holds this thing we call the germinal essence or the jing, and that's the refined memory of breath patterns over time that carries the memory that generates the next breath forward, essentially something like that. But it also holds things like our family line issues, and that's one of the seven causes of illness in aging nature-based medicine, this kind of family line germinal essence issues. So that if you have something that's running in your family line, it's going to express in your germinal essence and it be seen in the kidney. And also, maybe if we call the cerebellum or the back of the brain the little kidney or the little root, something like that, it'll be expressed upward into the cerebellum, and that will be expressed outward into the branch expressions of the brain.
Yep, that
Wow. We
that
blow.
makes sense to me.
Okay. We got a little work to do here, I guess.
We do.
What wouldn't I'm so excited about this idea about the epidemic of the lack of joy of motion. Because it's one of those things I don't think about because I'm on the treadmill too, getting. But then imagining how the world would be different if somehow we recaptured the joy of motion. But again, it's hard if your brain's telling you not to move.
Yeah, well, this is it. So, I mean, this is one of the conundrums that I face, it when, like, that I know that it's important to move to be healthy, or to do all sorts of things, and yet my brain was literally feeling like it was a threat to itself because of the sensory mismatch, and so it was a really challenging onion to peel. And also there's another idea that I think is really important, and I love this how it interfaces again with Neijing medicine, is this idea that from the brain-based perspective, we do something called survival through prediction. So we have maps in our brain that allow us to try to predict whether something's going to be safe or not. And so we have maps of our own body, and we have many maps of our own body. So many people have heard of
which
the
you might
homunculus.
also stories in a certain way.
Yes, and
They
I would
they
say
they they create stories, or
some
they
of them
create.
are pre-verbal and some of them are on
Right,
the
right, right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
like by yes, so there's
And
maps of like
stories, I'm not sure stories need words, but that's a different podcast.
no, it's cool. It's a helpful distinction. I mean, like because I'm talking about like for example, as I'm kind of going through this and I'm playing around with doing ankle circles and I'm doing it on my right. I'm like ankle circles. This is easy, right? And then I'm doing it on my left. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm not. I'm poorly mapped there.
Right.
So when you talk about um, kids and people in general spending too much time on screens, they are because mapping is like a use it or lose it. Like first you need to develop it and then you need to maintain it. So if you're literally just doing this all day, then the map of your entire body becomes fuzzier and fuzzier and
And
fuzzier
it's
because
your body map is your thumbs.
your body map is your thumbs. There isn't really joy in that, you know. So it's like we need to become fit enough for our brain to decide that it's safe for us to move, and we need to develop those maps.
And we have this idea, we talk about in nature-based medicine about what health is, and it's not that just you're broken, but that there's something called thriving or illuminative beauty, which is means when you're breathing and resonating with nature and the cosmos, and you're emitting light, and movement is such a big part of that. There's none of that without. I'm remembering I had some bad leg fractures when I was a kid. I had multiple surgeries to fix that, and I remember the feeling in my body after the surgery and all the pain when it broke of not moving, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you moved, it really hurt a lot. I can still feel that viscerally now, and decades later, as a messaging, like don't move, But what is that? How? And I'm sure there's many other people who've had experiences like that, and that could also be emotional. For example, if you grew up in a household where it was dangerous for some reason, and a strategy was don't move, that is a survival strategy, which I think a lot of people have, or in a changing world where there's a lot of chaos and change and uncertainty about which way to move. I often liken the current times to walking on the deck of an unsteady boat, because you don't really know and which way to go. And when we talk about like life coherence, is one of the requirements is stable rhythm, so that you know like where you are in terms of motion and what's coming next. And when things become more chaotic, you don't feel that. And I think even there's a signal to the body, don't move, because you're not sure what's coming next. So it seems like a huge epidemic, a huge issue. What can we do about that? How are you and I are going to fix that, or you?
Well, no, you and I. I mean, I think partly in Neijing medicine, where we're doing ecological restoration, so we go to areas that aren't breathing, and we're returning circulation and light there. I think that there's an overlap with this idea of creating a better map there. So
Yeah.
making sure that we can sense that and move that, and it's part of
and
us, and we know where it is.
and we also have the treatment hierarchy in nature-based medicine, which is, like first do the gentle things. And one of the first gentle things is feel tissue breathing. So like when you put your hands on people, one of the first things we feel is it breathing? Which is it moving? And basically probably one of the deepest definitions of an illness is a thing that's not moving,
Right.
or a thing that's moving out of sequence with nature, essentially.
There's this other idea that I think about because we have we have this idea of a concept of evolution and things going from simple to more complex and with life part of that is going from not moving to moving so uh
And
yeah go ahead.
I was just going to say, and now there's so much movement, but without so much coherent. I mean, I'm older than you. I remember like movies when they moved very slow and they didn't like jump cut every like millisecond, you know. And also we've talked about like the motion or pattern or the rhythm of electronics and Wi-Fi and all those things like that, and how it's very unsettled and
Yeah.
doesn't really have a rhythm to it. And now we're kind of immersing ourselves in these rhythms, and how do we get those rhythms back? But it's like we have way more movement in a certain way than when I was like 15 or 20. But the movement is very hyperkinetic and unsettling in a certain way. At least it feels to me as an older person sometimes, and not really in tune with a rhythm, an underlying rhythm. Would you, how do you feel that as a younger person?
So I don't. Younger is
Or
relative.
you know what I mean? Like I'm, or what do you think about that idea?
Well, I mean, one thing that comes to mind, and I'm
It's,
going to
it's
speak
like,
on.
it's like there's words, a lot of words, but do the words have a meaning?
Absolutely. I mean, you can have uh, things can be more complicated and less complex. Like there's more noise and less signal. When you were talking about that, one thing that was popping to mind is an image from a study. I'll try to explain it as well as I can. Looking at the change in non-native EMFs over the last like 80 years. And so you have we do have natural electromagnetic frequencies. That's actually the kind of
And they're
basic
important.
communication of,
Yeah, and they have a pulse and a rhythm.
and they have a pulse and a rhythm. And so imagine that what that looked like was that it was kind of there was a lot of them at the very slow end and a lot of them at the very fast end, like that. And there was a valley in the middle. So because of that, when uh, technology developed and they wanted to create man-made electromagnetic frequencies for communication, they chose the frequencies in the middle because there weren't lots of natural ones. So now what you have is almost like a there was like a valley that's like now full of landfill of those frequencies. So that's where they all are, and that's not coincidental because that's where the space was. So they have filled in the natural space with man-made frequencies. So it makes it so there's just lots of noise. You can't get that nice uh, up and down, and there isn't that space. So I mean, you think for example of like sound traveling. Sound travels through space, so there isn't any space left for that sound to travel. So I think for everyone that's a bit chaotic in a way that people might not notice because they don't. Most people might not know any different or remember any different.
Right, and it's so hard because it's like the water you swim in, you don't see it, and then in a generation, it's normal.
Exactly.
Yeah, like yeah, as an older person, it's really like, whoa, what is all this stuff? But then in a generation, it's like, oh, that's the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the world. Well, one thing I wanted to make sure that I kind of wanted to get your take on it, right? Is and this kind of comes up a lot in our conversations where when we look at the Neijing, you kind of remind people to try to take it on its own footing and from its own perspective as best we can as modern people, and not to try to project too much our own understanding. And at the same time, when I'm studying the nervous system and then I'm reading what they're describing in terms of this landscape, I can't help but notice overlaps and
Oh,
parallels.
there's tons of parallels. We talk about looking at it with a soft gaze, which
Right.
we, which means to go against the tendency we always have to want to put things in boxes and seal the boxes so that we don't have to think, because the brain also likes to rest. It has a priority of not working as hard.
Yeah.
So we're trying to like put everything in a box so then we can seal it up and say that's that.
Right.
But it's like it's to learn how to cultivate this soft gaze, which is also a really interesting way of moving through the world, which means there's no real certainties, but there's patterns and there's ways of moving through the world and things like that. You're right. So that's a brain, that's a muscle that you grow. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But one thing that struck me as I was getting more excited about the vestibular system is that there are a number of watersheds and pathways that specifically connect the eyes and
Oh
the
my
nose
god.
together.
You may or may not know about the descriptions. I can read some of them to you, but they're so this is one of those places you go, wow, they really were so far ahead of their time. I have this discussion with people all, it's a common thread like, does anatomy matter in Chinese medicine?
Like,
And I'm just like, I have volumes of anatomy from the Beijing you've never heard about. And, should I talk about them a little bit?
yeah, please, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, there's a really interesting chapter near the end of the Ling Shu. It's chapter 80, and it's called the Treatise on the Great Perplexity. Should I read some of that to you?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we can talk about it because, yeah, you're gonna enjoy this. So it's the Yellow Emperor, and he's speaking to Chibo, and he's telling him about a time he had where he had vertigo. And he says, I was once ascending the steps of the Qingling platform. And that's kind of like the clear and nice. It's probably like a viewing platform or something like that. When I felt myself spinning, crawling forward, I felt confused and perplexed and did not feel myself. Inside, it was strange and confusing. Inside of my body, it felt strange. I opened and closed my eyes in an attempt to settle my heart. Some time passed, and still my condition did not resolve. Everything was turning, and I felt dizzy. I untied my hair and knelt down and bowed my head forward with my eyes open, trying to steady myself. Time passed, but still my condition remained unchanged. And then suddenly the feeling departed on its own. What caused this? And then Chibo, his teacher minister, gives the answer. The Jing and Qi, the germinal essence and the Qi of the five Zong and six Fu organs, they all go into the eyes and they form the essence of the eyes. So the eyes are composed of a combination of everything. The space within this essence forms the eye socket. The essence of the bone forms the pupil. The essence of the sinew forms the iris, and the essence of the blood forms the blood vessels. The essence of the chi forms the white of the eyes, and the essence of the flesh forms the eyelids. Isn't that wonderful? These gather and bind to the essences of the other tissue planes, the sinew, bones, blood, and chi, like you're talking about how the vestibular system is related to all the other mapping in your body, joining with the vessels to form the eye system, which connects upward to the brain and exits at the nape of the neck. Thus, when pathogenic chi strikes the nape of the neck and encounters emptiness, remember we have the concept you get sick where you don't inhabit yourself, it enters in and follows the eye system into the brain. When it enters the brain begins to turn or spin. There's a spinning sense. When the brain is spinning, it pulls on the eye system and makes it tense. When the eye system is tense, there's dizziness and the eyes begin to spin. And you see that in vertigo when we check people's eyes. If the evil affects the essence and the affected essence no longer aligns properly, it scatters. And when the essence scatters, the vision becomes impaired and one sees double. So I keep going.
Yeah.
Thus, when the pathogenic chi, which is here a kind of wind, which is what you see in the shaking, strikes the nape of the neck and encounters emptiness, it may enter more deeply to follow the eye system and enter the brain. The eye is the envoy of the heart. The heart houses the Shen. Thus, when the Shen and the Jing are in chaos and cannot mutually interact, the vision becomes impaired. The Jing, the Shen, the Hun, and the Po are dispelled, and this is called perplexity. And then the Emperor says something interesting. He says, "I'm not sure your explanation is right. Each time I go to the Eastern Garden, which is where the wind and everything comes from, I experience these symptoms, but when I leave, the symptoms go away. Why is it only here where my Shen is troubled? What is different? And Chibo says, this is not right. And then there's this line that's just so interesting. When something brings joy to the heart but is hated by the Shen, there will be perplexity. The Jing and the Shen are thrown into chaos and the vision is impaired. Therefore, in perplexity, when the Shen recovers, the illness will resolve. This is so interesting. So it goes on there and talks about other things. But there's a couple of really interesting things there. One is that there's this character she, which means network or system, and we talk about it with the lungs and the liver and the heart, and it means the thing with its associated connections around it, kind of. In the eye, there too. So one is called mu shi, which means the eye system itself, the eye and its things around in the orbit, and the other is called the yan qi, which means the root eye network.
Mm.
And the character yan is like this, it's made up of the same character we use for the secondary root, the gun of a plant, but it means a foundation also. So it means the foundational eye system. And that's related to the Taiyang system and the Yangming system, but particularly from the back of the brain, where the sinew of the Taiyang goes into the brain and goes into the eyes. And that's what they're describing, this back of the brain network to the eyes. Does that
I
sound
mean, that's like, I mean, even with this system, when the eyes move up, it actually, our extensor muscles on our back activate.
And you know, they say that in the Neijing, they say, like, put your fingers in the back of your
Right.
head, don't
Yes.
move your brain, and move your eyes, and you'll feel the back of your neck move.
And actually, well, that's the sign because, like, for example, I do not feel it evenly, but I've had a lot of head injuries, so that's something I need to rehab. So we can.
Right,
That's actually a finding. And when we look down, I can feel it. See, I need to work on this. When you look down, then the front of the body should contract. So it's actually describing that connection to the sinew system of the
right.
Taiyang.
And then also, this is the area at the nape of the neck where also the brain circulations exits into the lower Taiyang River system. So it's like in all brain injuries, it's one of the first places we look. And it often gets stuck because what's going on at the back of your neck, it's like also like when you stare at a phone or a screen,
Mm.
and now we have like the bone changes from people in the back where they put tension on the sinew system and block that area.
Mhm.
Um, does that those kind of descriptions, they just kind of send chills down me because they're so far advanced of their time.
Absolutely.
It's like that's when we think the aliens came and gave us the and that's when when I treat vertigo. And then there's also another description about the stomach watershed and how it goes into this. I don't know if you want to hear that too.
Absolutely.
You do. Okay, let me see if I can pull that up here.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, this is in another section, another chapter, and the Yellow Emperor is asking about why does the channel river of Yangming stir? And the stirring of Yangming is the carotid artery and the femoral artery, we know, and things like that. And what causes it stirring? Which is interesting, by the way, because the where the Yangming River goes along the front of the carotid is also involved in this. How do we keep the pressure in our brain, that area, and all that stuff, our baroreceptors? And Chibo says the stomach chi rises and pours into the lungs. Its strong chi rushes up to the head and follows the throat and ascends into the empty cavities and follows the eye system. And that's that foundational eye system again we were talking about. So the one in the brain, and enters and connects with the brain. It exits at the cheek and at the guest host region, follows the jawbone and joins with Yang Ming, et cetera, et cetera. So that means that there's also a stomach relationship to this system, which we often see in vertigo
Yeah,
because one of the main symptoms is vomiting.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So there's a relationship. There it goes directly into the brain stem, so it's going to activate those vomiting sensors, and also there's this really strong relationship between the vestibular system and these neck muscles because
right. And these SCMs are like such magical muscles for all these things.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. So, and these neck muscles, the SEM and the upper trapezius, are innervated from the brainstem, from cranial nerves. So,
right.
so basically, what we I think we have the most mechanoreceptor, the highest density of mechanoreceptors in the body are in the upper neck.
Yeah.
So when we move our head, again, the brain needs to know, am I moving? Which way is up? And where is my head in relationship to my body? And so that system is all integrated.
And they all meet back at this place called the terminal bone, which is called Wangu, which is the mastoid process, which is right near the vestibular system, but also near the back of the brain.
Mhm.
And both, the SEMs and the trapezius, they both meet back there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
So
innervation.
I mean, for vertigo, that's like 9 times out of 10 where we're treating when someone comes in and has it,
Mhm.
depending on the condition. Yeah.
And there's this also another passage about I want to say if it's like the gallbladder watershed, but it talks about when it's not working well.
Oh, right, right. It says you are not at peace on the earth,
You're not at peace on the earth,
which
and
is
that
like you're walking on the boat with yeah, like
that's
that.
right. And that pathway runs between the ears and the eyes, if I
It
remember.
does. It runs, yeah, right in that. It goes right into the ear, actually. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So as I was reading, again, as I was reading those descriptions, I was going, "Oh my gosh!" Like from the perspective of how the nervous system is wired, the functioning is wired. Like that is just like such a bang on description
Oh my gosh.
of how these things are working.
Well, Mel, I'm so interested about how we're going to bring joy back to movement. I mean, we have technical things about how to treat the back of the neck and, evaluate watersheds. But when someone comes in to see you and they have these problems, what do you do about it? And how are we going to bring joy back to movement?
Well, I mean, this is always evolving. I'm starting off by evaluating these systems like kind of very clinically, but really dialing in on exactly where something might not be working well because we are so good at compensating that we can really
That's our downfall in a way.
yeah, we can handle like a whole lot of things not working very well and still keep going until finally the brain's like, actually, I don't think it's safe to move anymore. So I'm, watching. I'm testing people and saying, how are your eyes moving? How is your head moving? How is your body moving? And dialing in on things like moving. How is your head moving? How not be aware of, and that's kind of good. And then as we can spontaneously become joyful again, because now the brain's no longer saying you should go lie down. I think you're going to fall down. And so movement just becomes more joyful.
Right. And for those of you who don't know, and something I'm so excited about working with you is this nature-based medicine is opening so many new doorways and in every direction. And one of them is this idea about nature-based neurology or whatever the name is you call, but you're kind of spearheading that. And I'm so interested to see how this is going to integrate into our practice and treatments. And you've treated me, and it's been very helpful already. So I'm so excited about this. But imagine a world where we had joy and movement, and we weren't just
Absolutely.
how that would be a different world, and how many world problems we have occur because we don't feel good in our body.
Absolutely. And even one thing that comes to mind as well is, I was born and raised in the United States and I live in the United States. And there's always this movement to make movement safer. So they try to make everything flat and lots of guardrails and
Yeah,
let's
you
forget
need
about
you
the
need to be
stairs.
like at a jungle gym.
Yeah, you need it to be like a jungle gym. And you go, if like when I've gone to other places in the world, but even just say like places in Italy, for example, and they
Right.
have these like very
Up and down the
hilly
stairs. Yeah.
villages with cobblestones, and you get these like 900-year-old women who are kind of like walking up and all of this stuff, and it's like, well, they're healthy into old age because they're walking on an unpredictable surface that's keeping their brain awake and their brain active.
Right.
Or when I've known family friends, like for example this woman in the UK who lived in to her mid to late 90s, and her bedroom was up a flight of stairs, and I know there's a connection between her having to take
Right.
those stairs and here. Most people of a certain age are looking for bungalows of like they want to avoid the stairs, and it's like, well,
Right.
if you don't use it, you lose it.
And it's a very limited repertoire. It's like get up, brush your teeth, sit in your chair, do your work, go to your car, drive to the car, park the car, go to your work, come home. It's
Right.
like 10 motions,
Yes.
you know. or then you go to the treadmill because you're supposed to, you know.
Yeah. But you
Yeah.
make sure that you park as close to the gym door as possible and you take the elevator instead of the stairs and then you do your exercise.
There's so many behind the scene issues when we look deeper into the patterns of nature, and one of them, as I was saying, like how many world problems are solved by people not feeling well in your body. For example, if you don't feel well in your body and every day is a struggle, and it causes you to be off and you're like a world leader, what decisions do you make? You know, like wars start that way, I believe, you know, and things like that, and bad decisions about life and relationship. And a lot of them start in your body, but we never have that dialogue with the body.
Oh, absolutely. Because from this brain centric idea, the brain's about uh, survival and movement. But if it feels any kind of threat, that changes things. So
And
now,
it takes priority too.
and it takes priority. So, like for example, if someone's in pain and they have chronic pain, that takes a lot of their focus. But that's also pain is an output of the brain from this perspective. And so in our body, we don't have pain sensors. We have danger sensors, and those can be interpreted by the brain as pain if it's not feeling safe. So I agree with you. I think this is profound because then that affects our cognitive capacity. I mean, everyone knows this. If you've ever had like a back pain, like how good are you
Yeah.
are you at
It
thinking?
changes everything.
It changes everything, and then you interpret ambiguous signals as danger signals rather than ambiguous or safe
And
signals.
you feel life is survival.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Mel, we've come to the end of our day today. You did convince me how sexy the vestibular system is, and this idea of returning joy to motion is a very exciting idea. And you know, one way, of course, is just to teach it to young kids, and then wait a generation. But I think I'm just thinking about all the people who are in all life stages who could have more joy and motion.
Well, I think the vestibular system is an ambient system. It's always on. So I think anything we can do to help it work better, it like makes everything kind of work better, and then everything gets a bit more joyful.
Let's get on that. Let's do that.
All right,
High five. Ready? Boom.
boom.
All right.